Mac ran a hand along the dusty banister, feeling the roughness of years gone by beneath his fingertips. The wood, once polished and gleaming, was now dulled by time and neglect, each groove filled with the residue of forgotten decades. He paused, letting his hand linger as if hoping to absorb some memory from the house itself. 36 years old and the sole inheritor of this decaying manor, Mac felt the weight of generations settle on his shoulders. The silence was heavy, oppressive, as if the very walls were holding their breath, waiting to see what he would do next. He stood in the vast foyer, dwarfed by the high ceilings and the echo of his own uncertain presence. It pressed down on him in the vast, echoing halls where every step he took seemed to awaken the house from its slumber. Each footstep sent dust motes swirling in the faint slivers of sunlight that pierced the grime-coated windows, tiny golden flecks dancing in the air like memories refusing to settle. The sound of his shoes on the old wooden floorboards echoed back at him, a lonely rhythm in the emptiness. The air was stale, thick with the scent of decay and forgotten things. Every breath he took seemed to fill his lungs with the past, mildew, old paper, and the faintest trace of something sweet, like a memory of laughter long since faded. This house, this monument to a family he barely knew, was now his prison, its history pressing in on him from every side. He wandered through rooms draped in cobwebs, furniture shrouded in white sheets like silent ghosts standing vigil. Each piece seemed to hold a story, a secret, a fragment of a life he had never lived. The sheets billowed slightly as he passed, disturbed by the draft, making the room feel alive with unseen presences. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors stared down at him from the shadowed walls, their eyes following his every move. The faces, painted in somber tones, seemed to judge him silently, as if questioning his right to walk these halls. He could feel their judgment in the silence, a silent chorus of expectations and disappointments echoing through the generations. Their whispers, carried on the drafts that snaked through the house, seemed to mock his solitude. The wind slipped through cracks in the old stone, making the curtains flutter and the dust swirl as if the house itself was breathing around him. In that moment, Mac realized he was not just inheriting a building, but a legacy, a burden of memories, secrets, and silent expectations that would not let him go. The grandfather clock in the hall had been his grandfather's pride and joy. Now it stood sentinel in the darkness, a looming monolith of mahogany and brass. He stopped before it, drawn by its silent threat. At precisely the stroke of midnight, the clock sprang to life. The chimes were deep, resonant, each clang a hammer blow to his sanity. The sound seemed to reverberate through the house, through him. It was as though time itself was being reset, the world around him blurring at the edges. Then, silence. The clock face was still, its hands frozen in place, but something had shifted. Something was wrong. He woke with a gasp, the memory of the chime echoing in his mind. Sunlight, weak and watery, filtered through the dusty windows. He could have sworn he'd just woken up moments ago. The same chill hung in the air, the same oppressive silence. He went through the motions of his day, each action, each sound eerily familiar. He walked the same halls, the dust motes dancing in the same beams of light. The portraits watched him with the same accusing stares, but there was a subtle wrongness to it all, an echo of something that had already happened. Days bled into one another, each cycle a perfect, horrifying repetition. The sun would rise and set, casting long shadows through the mansion's empty halls, but nothing ever truly changed. The air itself seemed thick with the residue of old memories, as if the walls were holding their breath, waiting for something to break the monotony. Every tick of the antique clock echoed through the silence, marking time that felt both endless and meaningless. Mac felt the exhaustion seeping into his bones, a weariness that went beyond the physical. It was as if the weight of every memory, every repeated moment pressed down on him, making it harder to breathe. He would sit for hours, staring at the same pages in a book he could no longer read, haunted by the knowledge that tomorrow would be no different from today. He was trapped, alone in his awareness, carrying the burden of memory while the world around him remained oblivious. The mansion, once filled with laughter and life, now felt like a mausoleum, each room echoing with the ghosts of what once was. Mac's only companions were his thoughts, looping endlessly, searching for meaning in the sameness. The others, the few people he interacted with, the groundskeeper, the mailman, acted out their parts as if on cue, their words and actions a broken record. Every morning, the same greetings, the same hollow smiles, as if they were actors in a play they didn't know they were performing. Their routines never wavered, no matter what Mac said or did. He tried talking to them, tried to break through the fog of their repetition. He pleaded, shouted, even begged for some sign of recognition, some spark of real connection. But his words seemed to vanish into the thick, unmoving air, unheard and unanswered. But they just stared back at him with blank eyes, their responses rote and empty. It was as if they were sleepwalking through their lives, unable to see or hear the desperation in his voice. The emptiness in their gaze was more chilling than any ghost. He was a ghost in his own life, unseen, unheard. Each day, he wandered the mansion's endless corridors, searching for a way out of the loop, longing for someone to remember, to truly see him, but all he found was silence, and the heavy, unyielding weight of memory. The house, too, seemed to be changing, warping with each passing loop. Its very foundations groaned and shifted, as if the building itself was alive and restless, never content to remain the same for long. Each time he thought he recognized a corner or a window, it would subtly alter, leaving him disoriented and uncertain. Rooms he swore he'd already explored were now unfamiliar, the furniture rearranged, the wallpaper a different pattern. Hallways stretched longer than before, doors appeared where none had been, and familiar objects seemed to vanish or reappear in impossible places. The air itself felt heavier, thick with the scent of old wood, and something unnameable lurking just out of sight. The portraits on the walls, once stern and unchanging, now seemed to shift and change when he wasn't looking. Faces that had once been frozen in time now flickered with life, their eyes darting to follow him, their mouths twitching as if whispering secrets to one another. Their expressions morphed from disdain to outright malice, their eyes following his every move. Sometimes he could swear he saw a cruel smile curl on a painted lip, or a pair of eyes glow faintly red in the dim light, watching him with predatory intent. Whispers followed him through the halls, disembodied voices murmuring just out of earshot. The sounds seemed to come from the walls themselves, or from the floorboards beneath his feet, rising and falling like a sinister lullaby that refused to let him rest. They spoke of him, of his predicament, but their words were always just beyond comprehension. Sometimes he caught fragments, his name a warning, a mocking laugh, but the meaning slipped away before he could grasp it, leaving him more unsettled with every step. The house, he realized with a growing sense of dread, was no longer a mere building. It was shifting, evolving, feeding off his confusion and fear, growing darker and more distorted with every moment he remained inside. It was a living, breathing entity, and he was trapped inside its twisted game. The walls seemed to pulse with a heartbeat, the floors to sigh beneath his weight, as if the house itself was aware of him, watching, waiting, and determined not to let him go. Every instinct screamed at him to escape, but the exits twisted away and the house's grip only tightened, drawing him deeper into its nightmarish embrace. Desperation clawed at him. He tried everything to break free from the loop, to prove to himself that he wasn't going mad. He left himself notes, scrawled messages on the walls, even carved marks into his own skin. He recorded frantic messages on his phone, documenting each reset, each subtle change. But every morning the notes would be gone, the messages erased, the wounds on his arm vanished. The clock ticked on, each chime a hammer blow to his dwindling sanity. He was a prisoner in his own mind, the key to his escape forever out of reach. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. He would wake in the dead of night to the sound of his name being whispered in his ear, the feeling of cold breath on his skin. His reflection in the tarnished mirrors was no longer his own. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow, a mocking caricature of the man he once was. He was unraveling, thread by thread, and the house reveled in his despair. The walls themselves seemed to press in on him, the air thick with unseen malice. He was a fly caught in a spiderweb, his every struggle only tightening the strands. One day, a new face appeared in his unchanging world. A woman, her eyes filled with a strange familiarity, a flicker of recognition that mirrored his own. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for a moment he dared to hope. "You feel it too, don't you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the ever-present ticking of the grandfather clock. The repetition, the wrongness. He opened his mouth to answer, but before he could speak, the clock began to chime. He couldn't live like this, couldn't bear another reset, another day trapped in this waking nightmare. The grandfather clock, its chime a harbinger of his torment, became the focal point of his rage. He grabbed a heavy candlestick, its silver tarnished black, and brought it crashing down on the clock's glass face. The chimes died with a strangled gasp, the hands on the clock face frozen in their perpetual midnight embrace. The world dissolved around him, the room tilting on its axis as the clock's broken chimes echoed in his ears. He woke to silence. The room was different, the wallpaper stripped bare, the furniture gone. The grandfather clock was missing, only a fine layer of dust remaining where it once stood. He stumbled to his feet, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Had he escaped? Had he finally broken free? Then he saw it. A single piece of paper lay on the bare floorboards, its message scrawled in an elegant, spidery hand. "Now you're part of the mechanism." The silence, once a comfort, was now deafening, filled with the unspoken promise of horrors yet to come.